I think we have plenty to talk about today
Yes, we do.
because, the world continues to world.
I like that. The world continues to whirl.
So, all right. We are live on Facebook.
Excellent.
Okay, so with no further ado, welcome to Accomplices for Justice Take 5. This is our 5th conversation. And I am Jonathan Freirich. I happen to be a rabbi working on justice causes in a variety of ways. But before I introduce myself, I want to introduce my fellow accomplice, my co-non-religionist, since we are conspirers in different religions and perhaps a shared faith in the future.
Mm,
And so Pastor Wylie Hughes is the senior pastor and reverend at Orchard Park Presbyterian Church. Ooh, and we're going to admit Gerald
yeah,
Williams,
okay.
who is Gerard Williams is Gerard, welcome. I'm gonna keep you on mute for a little while, and if you have questions, just raise your hand and I will join. You can join in. I hope that's okay. And because I'm doing introductions, so
Yes.
um, I was so Pastor Wylie Hughes is senior pastor at Orchard Park Presbyterian Church, which is in the South Towns of Buffalo. It is a significant historic Presbyterian church here in the region. Orchard Park is known not for its diversity, but for it being the location of the Buffalo Bills Stadium. So if you see all the snow in Buffalo, it is all falling south of Buffalo in Orchard Park.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
And
is.
and Pastor Hughes has an amazing background. I'm not going to touch on all of it, but I do want to mention something that he once said. He once wrote in June of 2020 that the African-American author, playwright, and poet James Baldwin once said, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time." Unquote. Currently, this rage, anger, frustration, and pain has set the country on fire. If you remember where we were in June 2020, Pastor Hughes was doing a good job describing us. It is a raw and emotional, and oftentimes it ends up in violence. And while personally, I do not condone this kind of violence in any way, I cannot help but empathize with it. I too feel the rage when I see people, American citizens who look like me, begging and pleading for their lives, even as they are dying. It enrages me to see them dying or dead while other people watch and do nothing. As a Presbyterian minister trained in the Reformed tradition, I wrestle with this rage. Jesus Christ tells us that we shouldn't let the sun set on our anger, unquote, unquote. So that is Pastor Hughes. Pastor Hughes, would you like to add anything else to your introduction?
Um, no, that's pretty good. Actually, I wanted to comment on that quote when it was, and I think that was when George Floyd died.
I certainly was.
Yeah, I was when George Floyd died, and George Floyd died, and yeah, I was going through all of that and all of those emotions. Gosh, as you're reading it back to me, all of that context flooded back to my memory. What I was doing, what I was thinking, what I was feeling, and so thank you for pulling that up. I hadn't been there in a while, so thanks.
Well, so I was inspired to do so because I listened to my spouse, and Ginny is not just my life partner and the mother of our children, but also the wisest person that I talk to on a regular basis. And she reminded me of something that I offered um, in September of 2017 during Rosh Hashanah following the Charlottesville event. And so since I
Mhm.
was going to read it, thinking of a quote of mine, I figured I'd bring a quote of yours. So this is something that I said. I'm not someone who wants to be identified as prophetic in the foretelling, but I do attempt to try to be prophetic in the reading the now and what we ought to be doing.
Mm.
So The events of the last few months have been a wake-up call. This is following the protest in Charlottesville. Racism is wrong whether or not it seeps into explicit anti-Semitism. The Talmud teaches that God created us all from the first Adam so that no human being could ever say, my lineage is greater than yours. But just in case we thought the white supremacists were after someone else, or that the Confederate flag has nothing to do with modern day Nazi sympathizers, those fiery torches illuminated another truth and starkly remind us again, if one minority group's rights are threatened, we are all threatened.
Mm-hmm.
As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, we are tied together in a single garment of destiny. We are all tied together in a single garment of destiny, whether we are the least powerful or the most powerful person in our world. So I feel like that sets the stage well for some of the stuff of our conversations today. So as promised, I did my best to read the entirety of Jim Wallis's The False White Gospel over the last 2 weeks.
God bless you.
Well, this is my job as sort of co-convener here, as I'm the one who goes gathers material, and then you get to righteously comment on it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it.
So that being said, for those of you who haven't encountered Jim Wallis before, Jim Wallis is the founder of Sojourners. He is a white evangelical minister who has walked the walk and talked the talk. He left church as a teenager because of the hypocrisy that he saw in it, as somebody growing up in Detroit and seeing that the church, in his words, was really about private spirituality, not public existence. And that is really the thrust of his critique. So, and it is an excellent critique. He pulls apart the problems with white evangelical Christianity in 2024. The book came out just like a week ago, or 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that being said, I offer a question to you, Pastor Hughes. American Christianity, white, Christian, or other, white, Black, or otherwise. Helene Kramer has joined us. Thank you, Helene, for joining us. We got Helene, we've got a great group of people here. I hope you'll all save your questions for Pastor Hughes, and I will give you an opportunity for questions in the last 15 minutes, or raise your hand and offer a question in the middle, and we'll see what we can do. American Christianity. What do you think American Christianity needs to do for it to be a force for good?
Well, that's a very complicated question, because it treats Christianity American Christianity as a monolith. And I think that's Christianity in general is not a monolith. There are so many different understandings of the one gospel, so many understandings and versions, so many disagreements. And some of those disagreements among Christians are just petty. It's semantics. And so I guess the meta answer to that question is, we just have to come together and agree on who we are as a body. We just have to, come back to the source. And it's interesting you asking that question. I'm a part of an ecumenical group of pastors in the local area, and we are Wesleyans, we are Presbyterians, we're Methodist, we're Catholic, we're Quakers, and we come together, and we're trying to figure out what it is we're going to do, and why are we together? What are we doing here? And this is a group that has been in existence for 40, 50 years. And, some of the long-standing members were all asking, well, we don't really know what our purpose is. And I'm asking, what have we been doing for the past 50 years together? And so we are taking the last maybe 6 months, I've been sort of taking the group through Simon Sinek, finding your why kind of period, because we had to come together on one of two things. We had to be able to agree that we are Christians, okay, number one, and that we have a purpose and what that purpose is. And then once we can figure out who we are and what our purpose is, then we can be that force for good. But if we're going to continue to support the spirit of denominationalism, and if we're going to continue with identity politics or identity theology, where, you know, my version of Christianity is better than yours, or my Jesus is better than your Jesus, or my Bible is better than your Bible, we can never be a force for good. We'll always be a force of chaos and destruction. So that's how I feel about it.
So thank you so much, because of course you bring light to my, dark critiques. And because my reaction to Jim Wallis's attempt to bring light is that what Jim Wallis did is very beautifully set up what was wrong with one form of Christianity, white nationalist Christianity, as problematic in all of its forms, and set up the counterpoint as not just what he's offering is a good Christianity, but a back to Jesus's real teachings stuff. So Jim Wallis is a multi-faith leader. He's the real worker in this space for justice among other peoples, and I am struggling with the one true religion principle.
Okay.
Because whether it's Judaism or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or American Christianity in all of its forms, as long as we set out the dichotomy that what I do is not just right for me, but right for everyone, is some universal truth, we are screwed. Because I need to accept beautifully 100% that you, Wylie Hughes, pastor, reverend, are your own vessel of truth and source of the infinite.
Yeah.
And that there is, that my job in this world is to find a path where the two of us can share some of that path together without either of us saying the other's path is wrong.
Well, you know what? Interesting. I don't see that as a Christian problem. I see that as a human problem. I think, okay, I don't see that as an exclusively Christian problem, but a human problem. And I think, and I agree with you, honestly, as a Christian, I do think that part of the problem with the church is that we have this my way or the highway mentality about our faith. And, I am not an apologist for Christianity. I am one of those people who don't believe that a religion needs to be defended. If the religion is the truth never needs defending. And so I'm not sticking up for Christianity. I don't wave that banner, but I do think that Christians often get Jesus wrong. And if we would spend more of our energy and our intellect and our spirit and our passion trying to get Jesus right, we would probably be a lot further along than we are now. So we can argue about, Christianity and all major religions, really thinking that their religion is the right religion. That's a human problem. I think I'm not a Christian who believes that. I don't subscribe to the belief that Christianity is the only way. In fact, people come in. In fact, I believe that, God can be big enough to transcend religion. I don't believe that God has a religion. God is not Jewish, God is not Christian, God is not Muslim or Buddhist. And so therefore, for us to limit God to our own little group is sort of doing a disservice. But I'm not the majority of Christians. So I understand that there's a diversity of thought within all religions. So I really think that's a human thing and not so much a Christian thing. But I can agree that Christians having that belief is part of the problem in our country. I can agree with that.
Because, okay, if our vision is a multi-faith, multi-ethnic, non-theocratic American future, the question is, how do we get there? And as long as I somehow believe, and this is, Jews don't have the luxury of saying everyone's going to become Jewish. It's not something we've imagined for quite some time. All right, so there's no version of the Jewish messianic future that is all Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
We have at our heart a devotion to plural perspectives, even within Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fundamental teaching in Jewish sources about these two different perspectives. They are both for the sake of heaven. That as long
Okay.
as we come, we can leave disagreeing and still be part of the same project,
Right.
part of the same salvation.
Right.
And that's a particularly important viewpoint as a minority, because we understand that we're never going to be the majority. So the question is, can we help, Jim Wallis, for example, whom I think is certainly open to the idea of being helped, and for that matter, other white American Christians, to a place of saying, hey, the American future is not about going back to the true Jesus. The positive American future is about all of us going forward and accepting, that people come to wise traditions and teachings that have nothing to do with Jesus.
Okay. Yes and no. Yes and no. And I want to back up a little bit. I think we're putting a little bit too much emphasis on the religious aspect of the country, and we're sort of, and it's, this is talked about a lot, and when we're looking up information about Christian nationalism, it's it's based on an assumption, and I think we miss the fact that, okay, yeah, our country was not founded on our country was founded, America was founded as an anti-theocratic society. It was the framers of the Constitution were very, very explicit about separation of church and state, and about how freedom of religion means that everyone is free to practice a religion, and religion was never supposed to be part and parcel with the politics of the nation. And so I think that the issue is not so much the failure of Christianity to be an authentic the failure of Christians to be authentic, but how let me just go ahead and say it. I think the problem is how capitalism has infiltrated all spheres of our country to the point where money is power. And so now, because what Christian nationalism is really seeking power. They're seeking to make a power grab, and they're leveraging their faith as a political tool, and they're leveraging their money to buy political power, and they're trying to leverage these things, these elements, the government. They're leveraging their power to persuade the government to take on these religious or theocratic ideals, and that's a problem. And I think that goes to the very core of America. That's a really deep problem. It's not. I won't blame Christianity singularly for it, but I think, yeah, that's a symptom of it. But I think the real problem is how, the tapestry of our country, how all of these things are woven into our country, and how it's just gotten out of hand.
So I agree with you in that the theory of the founding of the country was not theocratic. The practice of the founding of the country was, in that Jews could vote or could not vote based on the whim of the state at different times. New Yorkers allowed Jews to vote multiple different times and took it away based on whether or not the people who were controlling the vote thought the Jewish population would vote with them in the 1800s.
Yes. And similar thing happened with women, and similar things happen with African Americans. Pick your minority. But again, that's not a Christian thing.
Right. What we say and what we do are not the same.
Of course, I agree.
And the practice of this country overwhelmingly has been for the favor of white Christian men with money. So let's
I agree.
start there. That
Okay, I can
that
agree.
that's been a norm, regardless of how well we've articulated a better ideal. And so the question that I'm asking really is, and to use some paraphrasing of a variety of other civil rights leaders, can we use the master's tools to build a better house?
Oh boy. Oh my gosh. We're gonna go there, aren't we? Yeah, I say no. Can I be honest? I say no. I say no. You can't. You can't. The thing needs to be torn down and rebuilt. I mean, let's be honest. You know what I mean? Let's be honest. And I think I've I have preached this many times in many different ways that there is no restoration without revolution. And revolution has to happen. I mean, the Bible, at least as Christians interpret it, and as I personally interpret it, is a is a is a is a it is a narrative of revolution. It is a narrative of that could be a revolution of spirit, a revolution of thought, a revolution of might, but it is all about redemption. It is all about fighting against is all about fighting the good fight, whatever that fight may be, in order to create something new. So you can't have the restoration without that revolution. Einstein once said, you cannot solve a problem in the same mindset that created the problem. And so, no, you can't use the master's tool to build a new house. You just can't do it.
So here is what I'm offering in response to both what you're saying and really what Jim Wallis is offering. Because, Pastor Wallis is articulate, is amazing. He's got some really good ideas. He has some plans. However, I think the thing that he mentioned, first of all, he mentions the Black church with incredible prominence and how the Black church is sort of good Christianity in America. So, he does that.
Yeah.
He also mentions the protest Christianity during Nazi Germany. And I wonder if that needs to be our model today. If we need a confessional movement in this country, a confessional movement that begins to really talk about what reparations might look like, a confessional movement that begins to say, okay, I, as a religious person, forget Christian, I, as a religious person, have taken advantage of the master's tools. And that I have benefited from them. I have used them to my own benefit, and in so doing, perpetuated their use for other people's detriment. And that if I don't, in fact, confess to my own participation as a white person, as a religious person, in a system that is, as you just said, to a certain degree, unsavable, then we can't move forward. And so that we really need sort of, we need, and I think I'm confessional may be the wrong word, but I think that's where we need to start. Because what I didn't hear from Jim, what I was hoping to hear, is that there is no form of white American Christianity that isn't complicit.
Yes.
In our system.
Yes. And let me give you a quote. God, this is so on point. So I posted something I have two pages, Facebook pages. I have a regular me Facebook page and a Reverend Doctor page. And I posted something, I posted a quote from a Mark Charles who said Western Christianity preaches a hyper-individualistic salvation so it doesn't have to repent from its systemic sin. And then I followed up with that another quote oh no, and so so I followed up with another quote from William Coffin, who says, "It behooves us North American Christians to realize now what the German churches learned too late, some 40 years ago. It is not enough to resist with confession. We must confess with resistance."
Wow, I like that. So,
Yeah,
so a
I'll make a copy and I'll put it in the chat.
confessional resistance movement, or
Or,
a resistance confessional movement. Because so the other things, this book that I'm reading, in addition to False Gospel, which I highly recommend to everybody, if you're looking for something that is absolutely transformative, I'll put the citation in the chat, but the author is Jeff Charlotte,
mhm,
and his book is The Undertow, uh, Scenes from a Slow Civil War.
mm,
Uh, and he starts with his first chapter is on Harry Belafonte.
mm,
And Harry Belafonte sits with Dr. King early in both their careers and says, "Dr. King, I am not going to follow you to church." And what Harry Belafonte struggles with, in his own words, is, how am I going to be true to myself and also tell the truth? Musically, performance-wise, and as a supporter and advocate of civil rights. And this put me in mind of a number of things. First, it put me in mind of the degree to which I feel like all of us in every walk of life accept the degree to which we must shapeshift, to use the words of, and this is Dr. Harold Stevenson. He is Brian Stevenson's brother.
mm.
He's got a famous brother, but he's actually wise and learned in himself. So Dr.
Yeah.
Stevenson teaches at University of Pennsylvania, and I heard him speak here in Buffalo, and he said, I don't like the idea that we code switch. He said it's actually shape-shifting. And this
Mm.
relates very much to
Oh yeah.
Belafonte's insight and this whole question
Oh
of,
yeah.
how do we speak the truth?
Yeah.
And the flip side of it, which is also mentioned in Charlotte's book, that people want to be able to say things that they feel on the inside with zero filter, as if it's their right.
Yeah.
Right? So that part of what the right-wing religion of Trump, for example, has tapped into is this notion that anything I feel I should be able to say in public.
Well, but that's the thing, Jonathan. They can, like, that's the that's the whole thing for me. I don't understand where this idea that we have these certain inalienable rights that says I have the right, freedom of speech, freedom of press. We have the right to print what we want. We have the right to say what we want. That has never been infringed. But the problem is not so much that they feel like they can't say it. The problem is they just don't want anyone to respond. And that's it's very immature. It's a delusion. I can say whatever I want, but I have to be able to deal with how that impacts other people. As a
Mm.
pastor, as a speaker, I have to be very careful. That's not to say that I cannot say what I want. Of course, I can get up in the pulpit and speak against racism. I can get up in the pulpit and speak against sexism and misogyny. I can speak against anything that I want, anything that I feel that they should know as a congregation. However, I have to be aware that how that's going to impact who I'm listening to. And so I owe it to myself as a pastor, as a speaker, to keep those things in mind, to say, if I want to communicate this, then I have to communicate it in a way that I get it, the point gets across without stepping on landmines. Because again, the people will rise up, right? The people who write my checks will rise up. So I have to be mindful of that. It's called being mature. And I think the rights assumption that their rights are being infringed upon is just a delusion. No one is taking their rights from them. The issue is they just don't want anyone to respond. They don't want it. They don't want anyone to call them out. If we call them out, they take it personal, as if we're calling them out personally. I call out racism all the time, and it pisses people off because they think I'm talking bad about them, because their idea of a racist is a person with no teeth, who lives in rural Alabama, who has no education. And that's not it at all. I'm calling out the racism. And so if your identity with America is so deep that for someone to call out racism, you think they're calling you out, what does that say about our country? What does it say about the individual? Does that make sense?
So it makes perfect sense, but I think we're stuck. We're stuck with the fact that, Charlotte reports on a conversation in a bar where a bunch of, and this is in 2016, where, a bunch of, somebody says, I love Trump because I have racist thoughts and he says them. And therefore I'm allowed to have those thoughts. Or I don't love the fact that he says, he says my racist thoughts and then I feel more racist, but he says that he's going to bring back, manufacturing to Youngstown, and that's enough.
He says it out loud, right?
Right. I'm going to be able I can shoot somebody in Fifth Avenue, but the point being, these are irresponsible words.
Exactly. Irresponsible. Exactly.
So the question is, but there's such a divide on this, such a huge divide. You and I are engaged in a conscious attempt to try to say something of value, whether we're talking with each other in an open forum like this, or we're talking to our kids. Right, understanding in something that I quote all too often, right? Arrested Development's song from the 90s, "Mama's always on stage."
Yeah.
Right. There's no word that we say in front of our children that isn't massively impactful.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
And but there's something about American society with the oppression that we all feel, that can't there just be a place where I can let loose and say all these terrible things that I think? And as opposed to, wait, I had a terrible thought. That doesn't make me a terrible person if I don't say it. In fact, I need to work on being a person who has fewer terrible thoughts. Not that I shouldn't have terrible thoughts, but maybe I should, maybe that's a sign for me to do some work. And
I agree with you. And I think, I lead a meditation class here at the church, and I say this all the time when people ask me, well, why are you meditating? I say, because our society is not geared toward self-reflection. Our society does not make space for people to look within. And so when we don't look within, everything that is within us just comes out of us in ways that sometimes we can't control. For me, when I left the military, when I left the war and went into seminary, I had a period where I wanted to punch everyone in the face. And I had to sit with myself. I literally found some Zen Buddhists that were close to me, and I went and I sat in contemplation for a while, because I thought, if I continue to let these thoughts permeate in my mind, it's actually gonna happen. I'm gonna punch somebody in the face. So I had to learn to self-reflect. I learned how to journal, I learned to meditate, I learned to do these things because it allowed me to process those thoughts. But it was so counterculture. And even when I talk to people within my church, in my circle, Christian circles, some people even said that that's the devil. Oh, that's the devil. You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be meditating. You shouldn't be chanting. That's the devil. And I'm thinking, how is that the devil? So there's this, there's this two things, and then I'll stop. There's this aversion to self that I think we've inherited from the Puritans who came over here, which has its own context, that we don't take the time to do that self-work. Okay. And so because we don't do self-work, we don't know who we are individually, which leads me to my second point that, again, America is so hyper-fixated on individualism. I think one of the biggest problems of our society is that we're all islands. We're all one. We're just me, myself, and I, and we don't have an idea of community, of a communal identity. Okay, coming from the African American tradition and the African tradition, it's so tightly bound up in community and who we are in reference to the community. And it's less on individualism and more on the family and the village and the town. And so because of that upbringing that I had, I was raised by a village. So I'm always thinking about, well, how is this going to impact the people around me? How are these thoughts going to impact the people around me? And I thought that that's how everybody believed, but it's not. And I've talked to so many people who say, I don't know how you could think that way. And I'm thinking, how could you not? Are you not in a room full of other people? But a rugged American individualism is just not, there's no space for that. Everyone is an island. Everybody is on their own. You're on your own. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
On our own, but not doing the self-work, right? So we have
Exactly.
individual salvation,
Right.
but what are we doing by ourselves? We're watching whatever we want.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not doing the thought work.
That's right. That's right.
And in and among all of that, we are now aiming for communities of pure agreement.
Right.
One of the fundamentals about your and my discussion is I am not interested in making you Jewish, and you are not interested in making me Presbyterian. And because that's the fabric of our vision of America.
Right.
That in that also means I have something absolutely wonderful and meaningful to learn from you, though you are not like me. And I believe that you think the same about me. So we come to this conversation with a great degree of humility and respect for the idea that there is something greater to be done, the two of us together, than either of us could do by ourselves.
Right. But we would have to step outside of ourselves. And that's the thing that I think is really holding back progress in our country, is that we're not willing. Most Americans don't need to have a mind to step outside. They don't even know what that means. To be aware and forget honoring other lived experiences. I'm an African American man living in a predominantly white community, serving a predominantly white church. You don't know how many times I get complaints. Oh, you preach too loud. You preach too long. You talk about racism too much. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's not that I'm preaching loud. It's just that they have never been to a church where people look like me. They have no idea how the African American church operates. They think I'm being loud.
Amen.
Right. They think I'm being loud. They have no idea how loud I can preach.
Preach, Pastor.
Right. They think I'm talking about racism too much when I only talk about race when it comes to the forefront of our consciousness, when a Black person is dead in the street, an innocent Black person dead in the street, or when innocent Black people are murdered in public. Right. So I only talk about it when it's relevant. And yet, it's not that I'm saying I'm talking too much about racism. It's just that they've never had the intersection. It's just never come up in their worldview. They just don't. It's not that they're racist particularly. It's just that they've never had to face these things. And now, because I'm an African American, I'm bringing these things to the forefront, and now they have to face it. So they're not willing to say, hey, there's other lived experience. Hey, this is an African American guy. Perhaps he's seen the world through a different lens. They don't have the wherewithal or the desire to say, maybe he has something different to offer us, because we're all the same. We're all homogenous here. Why add anything to that? And that's a microcosm, I think, of our country today. It's just even though the minority majority thing is going to change very soon.
Well,
It's coming to an end.
And let's offer some sympathy to the white majority who see their majority diminishing,
Yes.
for not feeling an understanding of the degree to which the rest of us are having this conversation all the time. So
Yes.
So you're an African American minister in a very, very largely majority white church.
Mm-hmm.
Merely your presence makes it a conversation about race
Oh yeah.
all the time.
Yeah. I didn't even say anything about race yet.
And which means what you have done is, and your congregation has done, is inadvertently brought them into conversation with your very existence.
Exactly.
Because when you go to the supermarket, almost anywhere in this country, you're having a conversation about race,
Mm-hmm.
because you're in a place that is not all African Americans,
Right.
trying to negotiate a purchase in what isn't an all African American space,
Right.
right?
Oh yeah.
When I put on a yarmulke, everywhere I go is a conversation about Judaism,
Oh yeah.
about being Jewish in a non-Jewish world.
Yep.
And so our white majority Protestant Christian neighbors are not accustomed to the multicultural conversation being their existence, and therefore find what you and I would identify as, every day, our existence, to be
Yes.
exhausting.
Yes.
And my friend Carlos would say, welcome after.
That's it. You're exactly right. Exhausting is a perfect word for that. It's like, oh my God, the race thing again. And I'm thinking, again, what do you mean again? So you're exactly right. They find it exhausting. We talked about DEI a couple of episodes ago, and you asked me if I felt like I was a DEI hire here. And I don't remember exactly how I responded because it triggered such an emotion inside of me. I don't even remember what I said. But I've been thinking and pondering and meditating on that. And I feel like I you talked about sympathy. I don't I know that my congregation did not hire me strictly because of DEI. I know that for a fact. However, that is exactly how I feel, not because they're making me feel that way, but just because of all of the experiences of my life that have come to bear on in that situation. So, I feel like a DEI hire sometimes because my vision is not really valued, but it's not because I'm Black. If my vision is not valued, I feel that my vision is not valued, not because I'm Black, but because it's different. You're just not used to it. And so you can't blame people for for uh by forcing them to see something differently. It's difficult to do, even for me. It's hard for me to even adapt to such a thing because we're all adapting, we're all learning to live with each other. And I'm finding it difficult to live where I'm living. That's not because of a particular way that I've been treated, just because, again, like you said, every time I go to the grocery store, it's a racial thing. Every time I go to Tim Hortons to get coffee, it's racial. And it's not because people are just racist, it's just because I'm the only Black person in the room. Every time
Right.
I pass a police car, they're looking. I see them. I see their eyeballs. They're looking. Like, who is this guy? Not because they want to pull me over, not because they suspect me of being a criminal, but they're like, who is this?
Right. Well,
Who
because
is this guy?
you're the unusually seen person in your
That's right.
milieu, right?
That's
In
right.
your setting.
That's right. That's right. So
So,
I have to check that animosity, that rage that James Baldwin taught. I have to check that often,
well,
you
and
know.
and and I think the giving us the place in which we can begin to talk about the things that we don't talk about,
Mm,
may in fact be part of, and I think, you know, I'm feeling like the need for a movement of resistance and confession,
Oh yeah.
with both of those things being necessary, and being necessary because almost every one of us at some point or another, regardless of culture, background, language, the only people who don't fall into this category are immediately newly arrived immigrants from another country. We have all, in fact, benefited from systemic oppression in this country
Oh
at
yeah.
different times.
Oh yeah.
Every single one of us.
Oh yeah.
So when we say something like reparations that triggers people who are like, no, 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 it's my turn to get an American benefit,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's we need to be particularist in how we offer amends for past transgressions
Mm-hmm.
and say, look, you maybe have been waiting in line for the idea that there was some sort of millionaires club here in the United States, but the fact of the matter is that the system in the United States has been less terrible to you than it has been to other people.
Yeah.
And we're trying to make amends for the terrors inflicted on certain people, not necessarily certain classes of people, but certain people.
Yes. And that's and a similar conversation uh happened when we're talking about student loan forgiveness. And I
Mm-hmm.
was going around and around with some people about this situation with forgiveness of student loans. And they were upset that, well, how would you even propose that I pay for your student loan? And I'm trying to explain to them, you do realize that you're not paying for my well, we're paying for your bad decisions. I'm like, it, we all made the same decision.
So
I just need,
I have to go back, and we need to start talking about generational wealth before we have that
well,
conversation.
that's my point exactly. Okay, so you get where I'm coming from, and that's when I
Right,
told this individual, I said we made the same decision, but you started out ahead of the game than I did.
right. My father paid off my student loans
Right, exactly,
for graduate school, and
exactly,
my father paid the entirety of my undergraduate degree. And why
right,
was that? Why was he able to do that? Well, because his father went to graduate school, and
exactly,
his father got the GI Bill
right, right.
when he
What,
didn't need it,
right,
meaning he got a leg up on wealth creation in the 1940s when
yeah.
um, when he got a mortgage at a lower rate
Oh
on
yeah,
Long Island, and a free graduate education because of the GI Bill.
exactly. And it's interesting, your grandfather and my grandfather had a similar situation. My grandfather was in the military as well, but my grandfather could not get the GI Bill. My grandfather
Correct.
could
Because
not get a
people don't
mortgage.
know that African Americans, that less than 1,000 African Americans in the entire country got access to the GI
Got
Bill.
access to it. Exactly. So that's why I was the first, no, second person in my family to go to college. Only the second,
Right.
because
And
we did not have the wealth that allowed us to even go to school. We didn't even have enough money. Even if we had scholarships, we still didn't have enough money to go to school.
and despite the fact that almost everyone in my family arrived in this country after 1900,
Right.
I am the third generation to go to college and graduate school
Exactly.
on one side of my family.
Right.
All right.
And
With that, we have 12 minutes left.
oh,
I want
okay.
to I want to see if anybody who's
We
joined us,
got
because we
deep.
have some wonderful people who've joined
We
us,
got deep. Yeah, we got deep. This is
right?
great. This is great.
Tay from who is a member of the Orchard Park Friends community, um, Pastor Gerard Williams, who leads an amazing Christian community here in town in Buffalo, and Vicky Hopkins, who is a longtime colleague of mine. So if any of you have any questions or comments, I have given you the freedom to make them, to unmute yourself and turn on your camera, or you can offer. If you don't want to do that, you can just type something in the chat. Look at that. We got Vicky, we've got Tay, and we've got Pastor Gerard. Thank you so much for being with us. Any thoughts, comments, anything that we've evoked or raised for you?
Yes, hello. This is Gerard Williams in Buffalo, New York. Um, an important part of the beginning part of an important part of the beginning of the conversation around the ways folks identify as Christians, at least for me, is connected to how folks understand their relationship with divine. I noticed the conversation primarily focused around Jesus, but for ecumenical reasons, Jesus for me is a step down from where the conversation really needs to begin. Because within the Jewish faith, Jesus is one thing, within Christianity, Jesus is another, and within other faiths, he's irrelevant. Where the focus, I believe, of the conversation has to do with how folks understand and interpret their relationship with what they call God. And why that's important for me is, if you have a fear-based faith, and if your understanding of God is based on judgment and condemnation, then we're going to struggle to come together, because your faith demands I be the villain.
Mm-hmm.
Am I making sense? And it has nothing to do with Jesus. It has to do with, this is who you project. It's kind of an anthropomorphic projection onto your God.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as far as you're concerned, that is the only truth you understand, and you're going to hold to it to your last dying breath, that God likes only certain types of people who believe a particular type of way. And so that's really where the conversation has to begin. And then hopefully it can trickle down to individuals like Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha and all those other individuals who were sensitive to spirit, who gave birth to some of the other denominations that exist today. But the conversation, at least as far as I understand it, really has to begin around, let's have a conversation around who you believe this God to be and why. Because
so Elder Williams, you couldn't be more correct. I'm right there with you on so many levels. Pastor Wallis, Jim Wallis, begins his sort of corrective on this with Genesis. We are all created in the image and the likeness of the divine. Something, by the way, that is not resonant for Muslims who don't like the language of image and likeness of the divine. And so, and of course, we're not even talking about the fact that we are a country that includes non-believers in anything.
Exactly.
And therefore, thank you for this corrective, because what we need to start is in a respect for the mystery and infinite possibility in every person, the dignity of all people.
One last point, and then I'm going to let somebody else speak. When you were talking about dismantling the system and it is going to require a revolution, the revolution has already started. When you hear talk around attendance in churches is diminishing, when you hear there's a huge resurgence of individuals who don't identify with a particular denomination but call themselves spiritual, the revolution has already started, because those are individuals who have decided the system that exists does not work for me, but I'm not going to cut myself off from my interaction with the mystical. I'm not going to say that I'm not connected to who and what I believe God to be. So the revolution has already started. It's the church is refusing to acknowledge the necessity for change, and that they are in the middle. They're in the beginning stages of a revolution. They imagine themselves having the answer within the system, when clearly the system that exists is being rejected wholesale.
Thank you so much, Elder Williams.
Pass the plate. You said it. You said it. I mean, that's it. The revolution is already here. And I if I've said it once on Sunday, I'll say it again on the next Sunday. The church the wave has left us behind. The wave has already crashed, and we, the church, have been inundated. We missed it. And like I tell my leaders, we have to get in front of the wave. We got to be able to see the wave coming and try to position ourselves to ride that wave, but not to be overtaken by it. But yeah, that's it right there. That revolution is already happening. So what are we going to do? Okay, as a church, how do we deal with that? But as a country, I think the church is a microcosm of our country. And so if the revolution has already happened within the church, believe me, it is happening in the country as well. And so how are we going to position ourselves as a nation to get in front of that wave as opposed to being taken, washed away by that wave? I think that's where that confession of revolution is that's where that conversation should begin. How can we get in front of it? How can we position ourselves as a nation?
So one of the responses to this, right? So the Racial Equity Roundtable here in town was following this Truth and Reconciliation movement out of the Kellogg Center. And the Kellogg Center nationally saw that the power of truth and reconciliation in South Africa and realized that there was never going to be a governmentally sponsored Truth and Reconciliation Commission here in the United States. So they were going to do it in a different sort of top-down way, a philanthropic way, get philanthropies and foundations to be behind truth and reconciliation. Maybe the answer that the two of you have prompted me to think about on this is that we need a truth and reconciliation movement. We need a grassroots truth and reconciliation movement, an outside the institution movement that comes from Occupy Wall Street, that comes from Black Lives Matter, that comes from the vast majority of people who are identifying as none of the above.
Right. I agree. Amen.
Vicky, did you want to have a question or a comment? You're still on mute. There you go.
Well, that requires, I don't disagree with you, and you know that. I mean, that requires a level of self-awareness in self-awareness to be open to and committed to listening to one another, not just listening to respond, but listening to one another, and then to commit to action in what you're doing, not just to listen to respond or to have such a strict position. And a lot of it is, fear-based. I'm going to lose power. I'm going to lose where I am, status. I'm going to lose money. I mean, rather than what's best for society, the community. And I think it has to start locally. What's best, instead of starting from the top, it's got to start from locally. And how can we then rebuild communities where we talk to one another, we come to some consensus, and we're in this for all of us, not just we take accountability and responsibility. You don't have accountability and responsibility, you have nothing. I mean,
Vicky, you couldn't be more on point here. Part of the principles in which I have recently been educated are, organizing 101. And right. Which means that I can't have the campaign for change decided on before I start the conversation.
No.
If we're going to accomplish change together, I need to be transformed by learning who you are and what we might do together, because your idea of what might be good for you is more important than my idea of what might be good for you. Right? This is Pastor George Nicholas said to me a long time ago at a racial equity roundtable meeting. I'm so tired of white people coming into my neighborhood and offering solutions without listening to the lament. Right? We need to listen to one another at the start. So we can come up with the idea for a movement, but the goal of the movement has to come from all of us. it has to be transformed in the conversation. So absolutely, Vicky, 100%. Before I start promoting, and I'm going to surprise Pastor Hughes with what we're going to do next, because I have an idea. But I have some idea that he'll be on board with it. Tay, did you have any comments before we jump?
Mostly I'm just here to listen, and I hope I'm not cutting you off from things if I say quickly. Somehow about halfway through my experiences, my background is math and science, science and math, and my experience as a young woman where it was not cool to be a girl in that, and I was the total outsider. There'd be like 2 of us and 40 guys in my classes kind of thing. And then getting more interested in a more general feminist. I've never been an active feminist, but I'm certainly been supporting of it. But the whole thing about how those things work through, I have to think about it in those terms partly. But I am thinking of the experience of one of my students that I heard about from her mother, who was working on her PhD, I think in physics, but definitely something technical. Anyway, back maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. Anyway, no, 15 years ago, maybe. Anyway, and she was at a gathering for young women who were working on their degrees in science and engineering and so on. And the man who was leading it, of course, it was a man leading it. Okay, the man who was leading it was talking to them about how you have to be able to work when you go out and you're working in the real world. You'll have to work with the people you work, you'll have to meet with them, you'll have to do things. And she finally, my former student, got up, the graduate student got up and said, well, you mean I'm supposed to go to the bar with the guys and chat, and probably your wife will really like it if I go out with you to do things. And so on. The guy said, oh, I never thought of it that way. So I guess there's a bigger world with the same sort of experiences and so on. And I will mention one other thing, because religiously this might be interesting. Quite a while back, and then I mentioned it to my daughter, who said, oh yeah, I learned about that in a course in college. But I had never heard of the idea that you can interpret the Adam and Eve story with the apple as actually God gave Eve the opportunity to give humans free will, so long as they behave themselves. And it's not a case of women got the men into, though this woman got the men into trouble, and poor Adam got kicked out because she did the wrong thing. No, she gave them the right to do things. And I thought, Tay, that's a pretty good story. Okay, enough from me.
No, Tay, I'm happy to entertain a classic Jewish rereading of the Eden story that does not, in fact, blame Eve, because of course we don't buy original sin, and we don't at all. So with that, thank you all for attending. Pastor Hughes, you and I have spoken in the past of the conversation between Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X about violence and nonviolence, and how integral their conversation was to the civil rights movement. I happen to have my sister-in-law is an activist and does a whole bunch of stuff in the Detroit area, and she recommended a book to me called "This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed."
I've heard of that book. Yes,
and it's subtitled "How Guns Made the Civil Rights Movement Possible."
Yes.
So I'm attempting to put the reference in the chat, and I think I propose that we start off with this book for our next conversation, if that's okay with you. Because I think you, as a scholar of Malcolm X and Dr. King, might have something interesting to say about what Professor Cobb has to say in this book. So I'm gonna commit, like I do, to reading something new for next time.
I'm gonna do my best to read that as well.
It's a relatively short read, so.
Oh, good. Thank you.
But truly, thank you all for joining us. I hope the conversation, Pastor Hughes and I are really focusing on the idea that we need to do more than talk. We need to do more than listen. We need to actually turn that into action. And turn our mourning into dancing, as it were. But really, at this point, the times are upon us. We have worn out the word unprecedented over the last 8 years. And it is time to say, okay, if we live in unprecedented times, we need to start taking unprecedented actions to get through them. So thank you all. I am going to stop the recording.